Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Tamara and here we talk all things social work. I just finished filming a video about the interview process for the VA. So now I'm going to do a video in regards to what a typical day was like for me when I worked for the VA. Now, disclaimer, every VA is different. Your day-to-day processes may be different. This is just my own personal experience of how it was when I worked for the VA. So I wrote down some tips, some things to jog my memory. If you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. I did scoop my notebook up because my handwriting is horrible, y'all. So I just you know, I have really bad handwriting. So the first thing for me, so the VA that I worked at is a good maybe 30 minutes from my house. However, in the traffic where I live, there is a tunnel and there is always traffic. So I would have to leave a good 45 minutes to an hour prior to my day starting because of traffic. And then once I arrived there, parking was horrible. So you had to get there even like earlier to make sure you have parking. So it's kind of another reason why I no longer work there, but it was a lot. But I had to make sure I left my house very, very early, make sure I had enough parking. I had to walk. It was kind of a far walk from the parking lot to the hospital where I worked at. So I wrote that down. All of this before 8 a.m. okay. So once I got into, because we had our own office, I had to share an office. That's a whole nother story, but I had to share an office and it was not that big. But once I arrived, I checked my emails, because that's just me. Like, as soon as I get to work, I check my emails. Like, I'm an email checking person. Like, I just feel like people are like, I've checked my email like 3 days. I'm just like, how do you not check emails? But yeah, the first thing I do is I check my emails. I even do that now. But once I arrived there, I checked my emails, and I worked inpatient at the hospital. So I checked my emails. Now my coworker, if she got there before me, which usually she did, she would go ahead and she would either print off the patient list in the hospital or she would be printing it off once I got there. So typically she would print off the patient list in the hospital. She would give me a copy. She would have a copy, and I would just go down and look at the notes that I had from the previous day to look and see if we had any new patients, look over any charts or anything like that prior to our 8:30, 9 a.m. meeting. So we had, and I can't remember if it was 8:30 or 9 a.m. So I wrote both times. We had a meeting for the hospital, for the inpatient hospital, with all the doctors and some of the nursing staff. I think it was, like I said, it was like 8:30, 9 o'clock. Let's just go with 9 o'clock. And we talked about all the patients, talked about their status, any issues, any concerns. So I would write notes down if they had questions for me, like if they were going to a rehab facility, if they were going home, anything that I needed to add. But mainly I would just listen to the doctors and write down notes. Now, we also had another round meeting with the ICU. So the ICU rounds were actually like in person. So the 9 o'clock meeting was on Teams. So we would just get on Teams and do it like that, which Teams is pretty much like Zoom, but the VA hospital, they use Teams. So then the 10 o'clock ICU rounds, my coworker and I would take turns going to ICU, but then eventually I just was the main person just going to the ICU rounds. We would go to each ICU patient. It would be myself, nursing staff, usually like the charge nurse, the doctor presiding over those patients, and we would just talk about them, any barriers, anything like that. Same like the 9 a.m. meeting, but just in person on the floor. When I say in person, on the floor, we actually go to the floor and go to each patient's room. So after my 10 a.m. ICU rounds, I would go back to the office, see if I had any missed calls, once again check emails, and then if there were some patients that were discharging, or if they had patients who needed transportation scheduled, because as a social worker we would do the transportation, which is like a transportation form, and we would send it off to there was one unit, the secretary would do it, so I would fill out the form and then send it to them, and then they would send it to transportation, which outside of the VA, that's not how we did it. It was kind of confusing, but that's how they did it there. So I would arrange transportation. If there were some patients that were leaving, I would ask them, like, hey, did the doctor come talk to you? Do you feel comfortable about leaving? Or is there any issues that you may have? Do you have a ride? So speaking of that, so I will say this, the VA system that I worked for, I was very surprised at how limited the resources were in regards to transportation. When I worked for like community hospitals, the case management department, which I worked in, we had like a budget set aside to pay for like taxis and cabs, and we had like contracts for transportation. However, for the VA system that I worked for, we did not have that. We had taxi vouchers, and they were very, very like limited. So I was very surprised that they weren't going like by stretcher to like a rehab facility, and even then you had to meet like medical needs to be able to use that transportation. And it was like that in a community hospital as well. But I will say I was very kind of surprised at how limited the resources were in regards to transportation for the VA. So that was one issue that I kind of had that I really didn't like, was how limited the transportation resources were. But like I said, we did have taxi vouchers, but they were limited as well. And also something that I wrote down was that I was also in communication with the dialysis social worker. So the hospital social worker and dialysis social worker are two separate social workers, but they may work closely together, because typically sometimes when patients go to the hospital, that's when they may find out they may have to start dialysis. For me, I typically found that out for some patients who were in ICU, the intensive care unit, that they may have to have dialysis. Now, there were some patients who had dialysis just one-time treatment. There were some they would need it continuously. So the dialysis social worker, and if y'all need me to do a separate video on their roles and duties, because I'm very kind of abreast with that as well. I did work in dialysis, and it was kind of the same thing at the VA as well. But they would try to find a dialysis chair spot, I guess, for a community dialysis center. So once they located that spot for them, they had the times and all of that, then I would coordinate that with the patient as well. But the dialysis social worker would tell them as well. So it was pretty much just reiterating. I would come in and just reiterate the chair times, things like that. But the dialysis social worker would come in and document that, like, you know, this is the facility, this is the chair time, this is when they're going to start, because patients cannot discharge. And so if you need dialysis, you cannot discharge until all of that is done and confirmed. So I would communicate with the dialysis social worker in regards to that. If they had any issues or questions, they would communicate with me. And the dialysis social worker and I were friends because we used to work together in the community hospital. So that's one thing in regards to social work, especially like working within a community, just certain areas that 9 times out of 10 you may know that social worker, or you may know that other social worker. So one thing I will also say to you all, if you want to work for the VA, and if you call the VA, and if you frequently have to utilize their services, be nice to those social workers, because hey, you never know that they may be interviewing one day. So try to go ahead and build that rapport and be nice to them so they're familiar with you. Make sure you always do an excellent job. We should be doing that anyway, right? Because integrity, and we have to make sure that we stick to our code of ethics in regards to our profession and our colleagues anyway, and to the clients. But you just want to always make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, because you may have to interview with them one day, and you don't want them to say, oh no, this person, they never communicated with me, they never called me back, they would never, they were kind of lax in regards to their job. So make sure you're always putting your best foot forward, especially if that's somewhere you want to be. Just try to build great relationships and have a great rapport. So anywho, yes, I would communicate, like I said, the dialysis social worker. I knew her outside the community, so we had a great working relationship. And then what else? Like towards the end of the day, we would just kind of wrap up everything. If anybody needed anything, I would try to go around and speak to everybody just to say, hey, good morning, how's your day going? Sometimes if it was really busy, I might not be able to see everybody the same day, but I would come follow up with them the next day just to say, hey, how are you doing? Is everything going okay? That's just how I was. I did that in community hospital. I would just go around and try to say good morning, how's everything going, just to check on them and see if they needed anything. But that was pretty much it. The rounds, patient lists, discharges, any barriers to discharge, also communicating with rehab facilities. I'm sorry, I forgot about that part. Communicating with rehab facilities. There was one social worker who she did all the contracts for VA contracted facilities. Now, for the VA that I worked at, there were certain facilities that they were VA contracting and the VA would pay, and I believe you had to be, it was like 50 or 60%, I will look it up, service-connected disability in order for the VA to pay for your rehab physical therapy stay. So she would complete those contracts, but I would be in communication with the facilities and with their admissions coordinator, and making sure they saved a room for the patient. Just let them know, hey, they might discharge today, they might discharge tomorrow, so they would save the room, and they were excellent at doing that. So I would have to do that as well. Like I said, talking with families, making sure if they had to do like home health or any type of like IVs at home. I would also have to call the home health agencies to see if they can take patients in the home. And at this time it was during COVID, so it was a struggle trying to find a lot of in-home nursing care to come into homes. Also, certain facilities, it was a struggle as well because of the COVID restrictions and certain placements they had. It was very limited. So at that time it was a little bit more difficult than how it was when I was in the community, because this was pre-COVID. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had to do, like I said, rounds, making sure I'm checking patient lists, going around saying good morning to all the patients, transportation, discharges, connecting with facilities in the area. Like I said, transportation. If you have worked in a hospital before doing medical social work and you wanted to come and transition to the VA and do like inpatient medical social work, even home health, because I worked that area as well, and I could do a different video on that as well, you should do fine in regards to this position. And even if you didn't work in medical social work and you wanted to transition to a new position, I think this position would be a learning experience, but something great to add to your resume and a great experience. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm trying to grow my community, and if you have any questions, any video requests, please leave it in the comment section, and I will definitely try to add that to my list on videos that I plan to make next. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and see y'all later.